There's currently a shoplifting epidemic in England and Wales, with over 500,000 incidents reported in the last year, which is a 20% year on year increase on previous years. And this has led to lots of different questions over when it becomes theft and what if you eat food in a supermarket, is that considered theft? So I'm doing this on the cooking channel because it's linked to food. And I think that there's a lot of people get confused about this. Now, I'm going to sort of mix law with the food aspect here because there's a very interesting quirk about eating food in a supermarket. Because if you eat the food in a supermarket before you've paid for it, you have effectively treated it as though you are the owner, and you've thus deprived the owner, the supermarket, of their rights to that product. Now, whether it's a liquid, whether it's food of any sort, if you consume it while you are there, you've deprived the owner of the rights to it. Now, one of the interesting factors would be for a prosecutor is to prove the dishonesty aspect of that. Because, well, it can't be burglary, first of all, because you're not there as a trespasser, unless you've been banned from the store because you've previously been stealing stuff and they've banned you and therefore you are there without permission. Then arguably you're there as a trespasser. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the theft aspect of food in a supermarket. I'll come back to the point at which it becomes theft in a minute because people get confused about that as well. Let's deal first of all with the consumption of something on the premises. And I'll then talk about restaurants afterwards, because again, there's another quirk with consuming food in a restaurant and when that might become theft. So I'll deal with both of those in a minute. But in the supermarket, consuming food in the supermarket, let's say you're walking around, you're picking things up, you intend to buy them, and you consume something along the way. Technically, whilst you've deprived the owner, the supermarket, of their rights, their fundamental rights to that product, the ownership rights, before having paid for it, that could then amount to theft. The difficulty for prosecutors will be here in proving the dishonesty aspect, because if you were to argue, well, I was going to pay for it, I retained the wrapper or whatever, or I made a note of it, or I'd scanned it on the portable hand scanning device, that might be a better way to prove that you intend to pay for it. If you've already scanned it before consuming it, then it's still not technically allowed. But the difficulty for a prosecutor would be to prove the dishonesty aspect, that you intended, you dishonestly appropriated it with the intention of permanently depriving them of it. So let's remind ourselves of the elements of theft, because all of these would have to be established in a theft case, even if you just consume something in the supermarket and so on. So theft is the dishonest appropriation of property belonging to another with the intent of permanently depriving them of it. And they have to prove each and every one of these elements. So the first one is obviously the biggie here, and it's been used by some people going to forecourts to obtain fuel with a novelty coin that head office has said that they accept, but then the shop says they don't accept. But it's not dishonest if they believe they should accept it. So this dishonesty aspect is one of the big ones to overcome. After all, we don't like to think of each other as being dishonest, and that is quite a difficult hurdle to overcome, to convince a court that it's been dishonest. Although the test for dishonesty has changed in recent years. It used to be a two-part test, which encompassed both whether the defendant believed that it was dishonest and then whether the rest of society believed that it was dishonest. But now we don't really care too much about what the defendant thinks, whether they believe that it's dishonest. This was the difference in the test in Gauche versus Genting casinos. So now we don't really want to lower the society's standards to just what the defendant thinks and whether they think it was dishonest. If we generally think objectively and reasonably that it was dishonest, then it was dishonest. But that is the hurdle to overcome, because if a defendant doesn't dishonestly appropriate property belonging to another with the intent to permanently deprive, then if it's not dishonest in the first place, the rest sort of falls apart. The dishonesty aspect and the intention to permanently deprive are often confused, because you may well intend to permanently deprive the owner of it because you've eaten it, but if it wasn't dishonest, then that's difficult for them to prove. So that is the difficulty aspect there. But obviously, if you leave the store, you haven't paid for it, that becomes much easier to prove. But that therein lies the difficulty with some people believing that you have to leave a store in order for it to become theft. That is not true. It is common practice because it's much easier to prove theft if you've left the store. It's not a slam dunk case necessarily, but it's easier to prove theft if you've already left the last point of payment without paying. I say it's not a slam dunk case because let's say you've got a shopping trolley full of food, £150 worth, and there's one item that didn't scan properly and you haven't paid for it. Again, you could probably convince a court that you didn't dishonestly appropriate it, because if you believed that it all scanned and that one item didn't scan, then that's not necessarily a problem. If the only item that didn't scan was like £100 bottle of whiskey or something from the liquor shelf and the rest was cheap vegetables or something like that, you might have a difficulty convincing them then, because reasonably that's the most expensive item. You would have made sure that it scanned. And so all of these things are taken into account. And that is why every case is taken on its own facts and its own merits. But now, finally, what about the restaurant? When you consume food in a restaurant? Well, most restaurants you pay at the end. Increasingly so, you pay at the beginning. And so they avoid the risk of you running off without paying. But we've had a lot of cases, I did some on this channel here, about eat and run couples where they ate a lot of food and they just left. Now, here's the thing. Even if they disagreed with the standard and the quality of food and they didn't want to pay for it, they cannot just leave without the conversation with the owner. If they refuse to pay on account of it being a breach of contract, they should at least leave their details there so they can have this formal legal argument about the quality of the food. They probably won't, but that's the very least that they should do, because then it's less likely to be seen as dishonest, as in running off without paying. Because if they made a case that, well, this food was really bad, and if they'd only eaten half of it and called the manager over and said, hey, look, this was really bad, I don't want to finish it, I just don't want to pay for it. I've done this before myself. I've been in an all-you-can-eat curry restaurant place, buffet style thing, and it was really bad quality. So I called the manager over and said, look, I don't want to eat anymore. I'm just not happy to pay for it. I'll pay for the drinks and, I'll wait for everyone else to finish, but I'm just not happy to eat anymore or pay for this. Oddly, he said, well, I won't charge you, but eat as much as you like. I said, that's very nice, but I actually don't want to do that. I don't want to eat anymore. That's the whole point. And he was cool about that. I was fine with that. And as it happens, everyone else at the table got ill the next day. So I was probably right to not do that. So I thought you'd find that interesting, because there's the social media feeds are filling up with people running out without paying, consuming on the way around a supermarket, and a lot of questions as to when that becomes theft. It's never absolutely crystal clear, but just as the final clarification, it can become theft at the point of eating or even picking up an object and putting it in your pocket, a product, obviously. It can become theft immediately at that point, because all of the elements could be made out. So let's say you've got a secret compartment in the clothing, which I've seen in videos. If there's a secret compartment in the clothing where they stash some product or another, that can become theft at that moment, because the moment that all of these elements can be proved, it becomes theft, and they don't have to leave the store for that to happen. So it becomes theft at the point where the elements are proved, where it is the dishonest appropriation. Appropriation could just be picking it up. Usually means putting it inside a bag or in your clothing or something like that. So it's the dishonest appropriation of property belonging to another, because you can't steal your own things, with the intention of permanently depriving them of it. So once those are made out, it can become theft. I hope that was interesting. Please do subscribe to the channel. We're here on the cooking channel. I'm going to do more cooking videos here, I promise you. So please do subscribe for those. And as always, thank you for watching.